From recruiting and consulting firm Riderflex, I'm your host, Steve Urban, and here is your Riderflex episode of the day. And on today's episode of the Riderflex podcast, we have my friend Charles Feldman, an accomplished attorney, founder and CEO at Gateway Proven Strategies, a global cannabis advisory firm. He was also the founder of Feldman Nagel Law Firm in Denver. He's written several books, a former federal prosecutor, U.S. defense attorney in the United States Marines, and a former Colorado narcotics prosecutor. He previously served as a DEA Drug Task Force commander and is a former instructor with the Department of Defense. You can learn more about Charles and Gateway Proven Strategies at gps.global. That's gps.global. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Riderflex show, and please remember to subscribe to our channel and like the episodes. How do you keep that hair, man? Well, how do you do that? Did your dad have hair until he was super old?
Yeah, my grandfather, I think he died with a full, head of hair.
Is that right? You're blessed, my man. You look good as usual.
Thank you.
So my friend Charles on the Riderflex podcast today, Charles Feldman, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it. Such an accomplished guy. When I already know you, but as I was preparing for the podcast, just going back through your stuff, thinking, damn, he's done a lot in his career. Like really, I mean, from an attorney to an entrepreneur to an author. I mean, you've done it all, my friend. And so fascinating story. Let's start with just telling the listeners, give them an overview in case they haven't, looked you up on Google yet. Give them a little personal overview, where you're from, some family stuff.
Yeah. Grew up here in Colorado. So went to high school here in Colorado and law school in Colorado.
Okay.
Joined the Marine Corps early on in college. Just had a grandfather who was one of those stoic World War II heroes. So that always, I think, drew me into a military aspiration. So joined the Marine Corps early on and found out about a law program that they had. So ended up going through law school through the Marine Corps. And then almost all my active duty time was either prosecuting or defending, criminal activity really from around the world. So I look back on my legal career now, and I think I've either defended or prosecuted about every crime known to mankind right now.
Including cannabis crimes back in the day, probably.
Cannabis, yeah. So I was stationed in San Diego. So early on in the 90s, and kind of our big war on drugs, I was certainly a foot soldier in that, and prosecuted some of the biggest dope busts in San Diego and in that area.
Wow. Okay.
I then got recruited out. I became a DEA task force commander. That got me back to Colorado.
Okay.
And a DEA task force. We chased all kind. I kind of describe when I told my kids about my time in the DEA. It really was the Breaking Bad series. We were chasing methamphetamine and cooks and trailers and sort of that whole scene. So it was very interesting. I did some narcotics prosecution at that point, and really by then I think I had my fill of government, was ready to move on and do my own thing.
And how old were you then, right about then? And were you married with kids at that point too?
Married, when I'd gotten out of the Marine Corps. My wife, she and I have been married like 32 years this year. So
wow, congrats. Yeah.
Sweethearts for a long time now. Had 3 kids right as we got out of active duty service.
Okay.
And then started my own law firm about 15, 16 years ago, and really enjoyed that. Always had that idea that I wanted to start my own business, wanted to do my own thing. Had always been intrigued by that, either kind of that adventure, but also, it's a little scary to jump out it.
Yeah, because you had been, so how long were you in the service in the Marines?
I did 10 years. Yeah, I was
Okay.
in 10 years in the Marine Corps.
Which is a super steady paycheck, insurance, all these things, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm going to start my own firm. And did you have any clients right away when you started?
No, I made the jump. You really, I think, as I
Woo.
describe to people, you really got to have faith in yourself first.
Mm.
That's really how it happens. So, believing in yourself, taking the risk on yourself. I was ready to do that. I was excited. I still look back on my first days as a private practice. I had one office. I licked stamps. I went to court. I typed my own memos. Did it all.
And it was just you?
It was just me.
Was your wife working at the time?
My wife, she was doing all kinds of stuff in
Okay.
Steamboat Springs, where we lived for like 21 years. Raised our kids up in Steamboat Springs.
And did you have a little bit of, not to get too personal, but did you have a little bit of pension or something coming from the military to help sustain you during that or during those early days, or was it super tight?
No, it was. I tell people now, like you get institutionalized in government service. If you stay too long, it's really hard to walk away from all the benefits and security. And I could see that. I was like, if I stay longer,
Mm,
really got to make it a career and retire. And I just didn't want to do that. I really
okay.
wanted to do my own thing. So
And where'd you open the office, in Denver or Steamboat?
started in Steamboat Springs,
Okay.
quickly grew to Denver, and then Feldman Nagel became an international law firm. That's
Wow.
where it is today. Yeah, we have clients around the world.
Wow. Okay. So you eventually hooked up with some other guys, and then Feldman Nagel, and you're off to the races. And then talk to us about how you edged into cannabis then. So at that point, when you hooked up with these guys to start your firm, it wasn't cannabis at first, was it?
Not at all. I mean,
Yeah.
I would not have even considered cannabis. Coming from a very conservative law enforcement background, that
Right.
would have not have been on our radar at all.
Okay.
And then you saw Colorado go through its big social experiment when medical marijuana passed, and then recreational as that began to evolve. We had some, high net worth clients who were going to invest into the cannabis space in Colorado. They liked our, legitimate conservative law firm to help guide them through that. And 10 years ago, people, there was still a risk
Oh,
you were going to prison for some of that stuff.
right.
Yeah, it's not like it is today where people are like, oh yeah, you just go walk buy it out of the dispensary.
Do you remember the first conversations when somebody approached you to help them in cannabis? And then what did you go to your partners and were you like, hey, I think there's some business over here. I'm just wondering what those early conversations were like, where you guys were like, I don't know, this
I
is
do. I do. I remember the first conversation with a client was like, you can go to prison for this. And they were like, what? I go, yeah, everything you're talking about is a felony at the federal level. And they were like, are you kidding me? I was like, I am not kidding you. Like,
wow.
you need to have a solid game plan as to how you're going to navigate this.
Were you guys nervous about turning your practice in that direction? I'm sure there was lots of conversation about it.
We were, Colorado, there were ethical issues for attorneys. Could you actually advise clients? Could you engage in the practice? It was complicated. It was murky. There was, vagueness everywhere. So again, as an entrepreneur, it was one of those where you're either going to step forward and
Mm.
take on some risk and move in a new area, or you were going to stay kind of in the safe shadows or the shallows,
Mhm.
whichever one you like. And
What'd your
uh,
wife say? When you told her?
I think she was all in. My wife has always been encouraging of taking risk. Uh,
Okay.
Otherwise, I just don't think we would have stayed together as long as we have.
How
So,
about your parents? What'd they say?
uh, that's a good one. My parents are pretty conservative, so I think they were far more skeptical then. It's interesting now going, 10 years into the future and
Yeah.
seeing some of the medicinal products that really help them.
Right.
And, now they're full advocates of it. But, it took a decade for them to get educated and learn that this wasn't the big bad boogeyman we had been taught for 70 years, but it was an actual medicinal plant that could help people.
I can almost visualize you at Thanksgiving the first year or two after you started steering, and your dad is like looking at you like, I can't believe he's in the Marines, he got a law degree, and now he's messing around with cannabis. I can only imagine those early conversations.
Oh yeah, no, it was a bunch of dope smoking comments, no doubt.
So then, all right, so then it starts to take off. You guys start to get more and more clients. You're building the law firm, and getting tons of experience in all kinds of areas. And then you built Feldman Nagel to what you were there. You're still part of the firm. You had it for 15, 16 years. And then now you've started GPS,
Yeah.
Gateway Proven Strategies. Walk us into that transition just a little bit.
Yeah, about, I would say 4 to 5 years ago, I found myself out on the international cannabis marketplace.
Okay.
So, Colorado had grown, and then state by state in the United States. Because of my DEA background, I was being asked to speak around the world of just about what was going on inside the United States. So
Okay.
I describe it as kind of this Lewis and Clark moment where you really kind of reach the top of this mountain and you have no idea what's on the other side. That's where I was on international cannabis. And I realized at that moment, 4 or 5 years ago, how big the world was, that there was a global cannabis marketplace for marijuana and hemp. And we all were in just this little bubble. Colorado was a
Right.
bubble. The United States was a bubble. Canada was. And when you saw really what was going on internationally, I was blown away.
I don't think people have any idea, right?
No,
Most common people walking around in Colorado have no idea how big it is worldwide.
agree.
Yeah.
And I really saw people needing the services of someone who had the expertise to help navigate, to really build strategy. So, most of the world wants to participate in the United States marketplace. We're the biggest marketplace that will ever be. So, the whole world wants into the US. They don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And then there was capital, there was so much money out there that was trying to figure out how to enter or exit or deploy. And so we really, again, saw another opportunity, a real sort of a cutting edge business moment where you could pivot, where again, you could take some risk and expand. And so I completely went in that direction,
Okay.
fully focused my practice on everything international. And then my partner, Bob Hoban, who had a very similar experience, he had built a very successful cannabis practice here out of Denver. He is probably I call him the walking encyclopedia on everything hemp. I mean, truly built the most amazing hemp practice. The two of us came together this year. We found ourselves out there internationally doing the same thing.
You were just naturally getting pushed towards the consulting piece. I mean, a lot of it around legal, but it was pushing towards more of a consulting firm at that point, just naturally.
Yeah, clients didn't necessarily need an attorney. They really needed someone who could navigate them through this increasingly complicated and complex ecosystem that we call international cannabis. It is so complicated.
I can't even imagine just the supply chain and import export. I mean, my God, yeah, there's so many.
Absolutely. So that's kind of where GPS was born. GPS.global. We formed that company this year, and it has just exploded and taken off for us. So we really have, we're just the only ones out there in the world right now providing this service of a network, a true global network that can guide and advise and navigate clients through this space. And really what I think we talk most about, which is I think helpful for your listeners, is it's really focused on revenues, helping companies build a successful strategy that leads them to actual revenues.
Right.
So much in marijuana and cannabis today that you look at the Canadian model of entire businesses built around valuations with zero revenue.
Right. Yeah, some of these valuations and some of the money some of these people are I guess a few years ago, what they're paying for some of these early cannabis companies with no revenues and fake valuations. Yeah, crazy.
It's crazy.
Uh,
Yeah, so I think those days are quickly have gone by. I think most of the clients we work with are sophisticated. They're Fortune 500
okay.
companies.
Okay.
They're navigating, getting ready. They either have entered the space, trying to figure out the CBD side to it, or they're getting ready for the complete lifting, getting out of prohibition on a federal level. So it's exciting.
Do you see where's the revenue really going to come from? Farming and the plant itself, or the THC side, or the CBD side, or all the above? Like, where do you see that heading? I guess it
Yeah.
would be a question.
On a global sense, I think hemp is one of the most exciting commodities to come across
Mm-hmm.
um, in a long, long time. So not only is there, you're going to grow this plant. So not only is there the commercial agricultural side of, and everything that entails, as world farmers, we've been doing that, for centuries now. So you've got that very traditional business model. You've got protein that comes out of that plant. You've got ethanol that comes out of the plant. You've got transportation, importation, exportation. The CBD, the THC, those are ingredients of the plant, and they're just one of hundreds.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a whole medical vertical that's going to come out of that plant, and the science and the hospitals and the healthcare. So there's a lot of people out there like, oh my God, if you're not in cannabis, you're too late. I call bullshit on that. I think it's just getting started. I think there's just so many opportunities. We're just starting to see.
What happens to, if I can drill it into Colorado for just a minute, take it down to 5,000 feet. So I live in northern Colorado in a small town up here where there's a bunch of farmers. And there's a little tavern down the street from my house that I frequent, and I'll see some of the farmers there that farm this land. And I've asked them several times. I'm like, so what's your plan? What are you going to do with hemp? Are you going to stop growing corn? Or are you going to, my question would be, what's your early vision on what happens to the traditional American Colorado farmer that's planting 10,000 acres of corn? I mean, do you see these guys transitioning? What do you see happening to those guys? And what would your recommendations be for some of these guys? Because I've talked to several local farmers, and you can tell they're doing their homework. They've had conversations. They are studying it. They are watching it closely. Some of them haven't made any moves yet. Some of them, so well, I got nervous because there wasn't any place to process the stuff, and some farmers planted it and they couldn't get it processed. What's your vision for some of those local farmers?
I think there's a place for everybody. So I do think you'll see a lot more of the big commercial ag replacing a lot of replacement crops. Hemp is a very interesting plant. It's very drought resistant. It takes, just a tenth of the water that cotton would take. So there's a reason this plant has survived for 10,000 years and has been around as long as it has. And there's just so many products, from the material and the strains and the fibers and the food and the ingredient. I mean, there's just so many different things that this plant can produce. So I think it's going to be very attractive for commercial farmers and agricultural, just because of all the different aspects that can be produced out of this one plant.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you'll start to see too, it'll very much follow a track like big alcohol has, the alcohol industry. There's some big commercial, big box, the Coors and the Busch, those sort of things that have giant market share. But there's also a place for the little guy. You'll see a lot of those home brewed, craft brew. You see it all over in our mountain towns of all the little, sort of a whiskey bars and this micro brew here, there. So again, I think there's going to be a place for everyone in this ecosystem as it continues to evolve. But it takes strategy. I mean, you can't just jump into it being like, oh, I've got 10,000 acres. You really got to figure out, like you're talking with those farmers, of how do you participate? Where do you participate? What's that lead up to, actual revenues, and what's that investment look like?
Speaking of the microbrew analogy, what happens to all these little CBD companies? I mean, I meet these guys. Riderflex, as a recruiting firm, probably 30% of our volume is cannabis or CBD related, and I'll talk to these founders of these little CBD companies, and I can't help but think, like, man, when some of the big pharmaceutical companies or tobacco companies or whoever, when they start mass producing more and more, I mean, are all these little guys out of business? I just wonder what's going to happen to them. What's your thought? Do you think there's life for these little CBD mom and pop companies doing $1 million a year? I don't know.
Yeah, probably not.
Uh,
If I gave an honest answer,
Okay.
I look at CBD as not really the future of the industry. Right now, CBD is the hot topic,
Right.
but it's just a small ingredient of many out of this plant. And I think, when we're 10 years forward looking back and we've got science behind this and medical research and hospitals and the VA and everyone else, there'll be hundreds of other ingredients that may turn out to be far more valuable to the human body than CBD is. But
Mm.
CBD is what's driving it forward. It's got interest. People know it. They're interested in it. On the commercial side, it's going to be tough to compete
Yeah.
with some of the big boys because they own all the shelf space. So
Right.
coming up with your brand that will get you the shelf space that they already own, that's going to be tough. THC is going to have a different side to it because they're kind of creating their own shelf space. That's different. But if you got to go compete, at King Supers or Walgreens or Walmart, that's a really tight distribution model. That's so competitive on who gets in there. And I probably feel like they're going to create their own brands. They've got their own brands. They're going to put those
Exactly.
ingredients in it
Yep.
versus
Yep.
buying you or I's, great CBD brand that we just come up with. So,
So as an investor or as an entrepreneur, you would steer people towards the bigger agricultural investment side of things rather than encouraging somebody to like come up with a little CBD brand, is what it sounds like.
yeah, I don't see the future as CBD brands, and
Okay.
there's so many people in the industry would, poke my eyes out for saying that because that's a very unpopular opinion. But again, where I look at really where I think GPS's expertise is, it's really what is that forward thinking vision, and how do we actually get to a profitable industry. If you're in it, you really got to prepare a strategy where you can pivot. This is every 6 months, you may have to pivot in a new direction as this industry continues to evolve.
And what do you see internationally happening? Do you think the U.S. is going to be a big time exporter? Are we going to import? Like, what other countries are going to? I mean, as the international laws start to take place, and where do you see that going? Where does the U.S. end up in all that compared to Colombia and everybody else that's involved?
I see the US as a consumer marketplace. We are
Okay.
the number one consumer marketplace. So
Okay.
everybody who wants in, when you just look at the numbers and whether, it was early on, we called them patients. And as this evolves and we get beyond federal legalization to where we truly have a consumer marketplace, there's no place like it in the world. I'll just tell you that hands down.
Okay.
Our numbers and just how we are as a country, I think you'll continue to see that as the number one consumer marketplace. And then that creates for the rest of the world, the EU will be not far behind that. Again, another big consumer marketplace. You look at places like Africa, where I'm speaking next week to talk about that marketplace. They can produce that commercial agricultural product at a price point the United States will never compete with.
Gotcha.
Canada won't even be a legitimate, viable player just because of their environment. When you're trying to grow hemp and marijuana in Canada in a high carbon footprint indoor grow versus Africa that can grow it for free, or
Right.
Colombia or South and Central America or Mexico, when you truly see a global commoditization of that plant, it's, oh man, then it really gets exciting.
So the entrepreneurial side then for us, for the U.S., is if you can capitalize on the imports that will eventually flood this way, and whether that's distribution or marketing or wholesale or whatever, do you see that as an upside for entrepreneurs here in the U.S. as we move along?
If you're going to be in the U.S., you got to figure out how are you viable 10 years from now? And
Yep.
you really got to be able to either look into your crystal ball and luck out, or how I market GPS is, if you're not a crystal ball sort of person, you want to go build a strategy, that you've got experts around who know how to do that. You got to look 10 years down the road of where is this market going to be 10 years from now, and how am I participating? How am I relevant, viable? Am I of the size that I can actually compete? If it's all Walmart in 10 years, how do I compete? What brand do I need that they would pick up or sell or produce, or sort of where do I fit into the big commercial agricultural? And we've seen it. I mean, a lot of this stuff is, we've already done this for 100 years, and it's really figuring out your place in a very traditional economic model.
The phone calls you're getting right now for Gateway Proven Strategies, what's the most common phone call you get? Is it investment bankers or money guys that are like, hey, I want to get in the industry and we want to start a cannabis business, please help us? Or is it calls from other countries that say, hey, we want to build something in Colombia and we have no idea how to get started? Like, what is your average call, or is it just all over the board?
It's I think a little bit all over the board. It would be certainly capital. We have a huge client base where we guide capital.
Okay.
Capital is getting more sophisticated as the day go by.
Okay.
And so you don't want to see, I pick on Constellation all the time. The capital doesn't want to be in that situation like they came out of Canada, with so much invested in just utter nonsense, without a true strategy to revenues. We also have we're working with a governmental client in the Middle East right now who has hired us to build their entire hemp and marijuana strategy for this Middle Eastern country.
Wow.
And from having nothing to, hey, what should we be? Should we be an importer, an exporter? Are we a consumer base? Where can we fit in? Where can we compete? To all sorts of R&D and IP, especially a lot of clients coming out of Israel, which is a big intellectual property country.
Okay.
So they've got a lot of great commercial, agricultural, intellectual property. How do we market that in the U.S.? How do we get into the U.S. marketplace and compete and sell that? So, and even small countries too, who I think have had some initial success, and now they're seeing the commoditization and the consolidation of this industry, where that initial success is not continuing long term, and they need a new strategy to either fundraise capital or pivot, and sort of grow from that initial success where they're struggling right now. And they get the value of paying for strategy right now. That's really the most successful clients we have.
Do you guys take them all the way through standing up the business for day one operation, or is it more just strategy and structural, legal setup? Or how far do you take them?
That's a great question. It's actually from beginning to end. So
okay.
Our network, the operators that we have, the expertise that we have is unheard of, where you can actually build the strategy, and then we're not done. We don't just give you a memo. Hey, we've actually got the actual operators who are also successful, who are going to help you do that. So whether it's,
great,
move from this size of a business to where we want to scale up, we're going to actually provide the people and get the people around you. Oh, okay, now we need a capital infusion. Great, we've got that network, and we've vetted you. We've put you through that process. So our capital loves that GPS stamp of approval. And now we can do your capital raise because we've already gotten you prepared for that network. So I just don't see anybody out there coming even close to what we're doing.
That's a good point, because when I was doing my homework, I tried to find competition for
Yeah.
gateway proven strategies, and I couldn't really find any. I really appreciate you clarifying that. So yeah, you can call gateway proven strategies, and they can take you from strategy and design and vision all the way through capital raise, all the way through operations have started, and you actually got revenue and put a check in the bank.
Right. Right. That's success for us. When there's revenue in your bank account, we've done our job.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then of course, I'm sure you could stick around to help them and be a partner, long term as well. I'm guessing as things continue to, like to your point, pivot and change, which they're going to. I mean, my gosh, with the international laws, especially the import export stuff, I mean, how far away are we from even deciding what is CBD and what's THC and the levels? I mean, there's so many things you're going to have to help people navigate through, I'm guessing, as it moves along.
There's a different standard when it comes to the THC hemp issue than the U.S. does. So, producing it here may not be EU compliant, and so if you haven't figured that strategy out, you may have a whole lot of product that you can't do anything with.
Oh man, is most of your business early on? So Gateway was founded when, a year ago? How long?
This year, yeah,
Okay,
really this year.
is your early client out of the U.S., or the majority of them are not here, or do you still service some Colorado people as well? Or
I think our clients are spread across the world,
yeah,
so I think it's an equal spread. We definitely service local Colorado just because headquarters is out of Denver. California is a huge marketplace for us. Obviously, right now it's just so much going on, but all the new states coming out, state by state, still draw a lot of business. And then again, our international focus and just how to participate. When I say internationally, it's also how do those international folks partner up and integrate with all the U.S. clientele that we have.
that's awesome. I think as always, you're right on the cutting edge of doing the right thing for business, my friend, because your vision is so clear, and you're always looking ahead and asking yourself, okay, where should we be in 10 years, or what should we do next? I love that about you. I also admire your willingness to take risks. I mean, so many people, and if I can edge into this for the podcast, because a lot of our listeners, they dial in for this topic, is you could have just stayed in the Marine Corps and retired there with a little pension and had a regular little life, but you had the balls to step out and do something, and you've been doing entrepreneurial stuff ever since then. For those people listening that are in this job, they've been there for 10 or 15 years, whether it's the military or some other job, and they drive to work every day miserable, thinking, God, I want to be an entrepreneur. Gosh, I want to start my own business, but they're scared. They got a big mortgage. They got 2 kids at home. They only got 20 grand in the bank. So they don't know how they're going to live if they start something. What would you tell those listeners?
That's a great question. That is probably the $1,000,000 question. I would answer it this way. It's what I tell my kids.
Okay.
Life is short. I promise you, at the end of life, you will never look back, and your regrets will not be, wow, I took that risk and failed, or wow, wasn't that exciting, but that really didn't turn out the way I thought. I think our regrets are going to be, I should have,
Yes.
why didn't I? So for those, I run across it all the time, whether they're, people getting out of government service or considering something else. I constantly try to remind those in my circle of life is short. We just don't know what that looks like. And I promise you the downside to running your own business, and there's plenty of it. It is a haul. It is
Yeah.
a constant slog of trying to make your business work. But the upside of having your own, I would never give up the freedom I have every day. That is the most valuable thing in my life. Is I get up today, I don't work for someone else. I can decide
Yep.
what I want to do today. And it's not always the most pleasant day. There's just a lot of work to it, but it's my day.
Yeah.
I'm setting the pace. I'm setting what I want to do, how I want to do it. And so when you do fail, I think you can take some ownership of that. It does feel good at this point in my career to know that my failures are my own, and I've got plenty of them. And it feeds into my successes are my own too. It just sort of gives you that sense of accomplishment, which I like, being my own business person these days. Of, whatever failure or success I have, it will be because of my own hard work ethic.
Love it. Love it. I just told a friend recently, I said, the last 3 years building Riderflex has been the most special time in my life. At the age of 52, I speaking of regrets, I wish I would have done it a long time ago. And I told him, we were having a glass of wine, and I said, if I ever had to go back to just being a W-2 employee somewhere, I think I'd shoot myself in the head. Maybe, I don't know. It is a special, special feeling. And then how about this question? I know I don't want to keep you too long because I know you're super busy. How about this one? People listen to this podcast and they want to be part of, the Gateway Proven Strategies team. They want to meet Charles. They want to, because you're probably, first of all, I'm guessing you're getting calls all the time saying, I want to be part of your team. But we put this podcast out, you're going to get some more calls, and they're going to be like, hey, I want to do that. I want to travel to Africa. I want to help you build this thing. If you're looking at people to join your team, and I'm guessing you're going to have to hire up a bunch of folks because you guys are going to be busier than hell, tell me what you're looking for. What character traits, what personality styles are you looking for to join Gateway Proven Strategies?
I would just describe you, having met you, several years back. It is people who are willing to take the risk in themselves first and foremost. So if you're asking me as a business owner to take risk on you and send you out there, and I'm looking for people who are willing to take that risk first, who believe enough in themselves, who believe enough in their ability, who truly have a sense of self. And that's constantly developing. As you and I know, we're both 52 years old this year. That you're at a different, you see the world a little bit differently when you're in that space. And every person I hire, and I'm constantly hiring people, and you're exactly right. We are staffing up like crazy now. And that's always my first question is, what is it that you believe about yourself that believe, that you convince yourself you're going to excel and succeed at this? And that's the answer I look for. In every interview, it's like, tell me, let's just start right there.
I love it. I love it. Two more questions, and real quick, if you could, you've been highly successful already, and congratulations on everything. By the way, the books that Charles has written are all on Amazon, right? If they want to order some. What was the latest one you just put out? Pharaoh's Daughter. Go ahead.
It's called King David and the Death's Head Ring Affair.
Okay, cool. When was that released?
That got published this summer. It's book 3 in probably a 4-book series.
How the hell do you find time to do everything you do? I mean, my God, I don't know how you do all this, my friend. How do you do that?
A lot of airplane time. I do a lot of writing on airplanes because I travel so much, and it's a great creative little outlet for me, and I really get invested in my characters, and I love the research. This is like a World War II historical timepiece, and again, probably going back to my grandfather's days, having served in that war. It's very intriguing, and I love that actual part of history and
cool.
Putting characters in the middle of it.
Your work ethic is a lot like mine, my friend. I think when I used to travel on the airplane all the time, I worked constantly. I would be doing something productive, right? Whatever it might be. And I would be riding next to guys in first class often, and they're just like playing solitaire or goofing off, and my work ethic, my dad was an oil field worker, and he had the work ethic of a bear. And like, if he knew I was riding in first class playing solitaire, even when I was 40, he'd probably kill me. And so I'm like you, like I'm doing something productive all the time. If you could call your 21-year-old self right now, actually, if you could call that young man while he was in college, right before he signed up for the Marine Corps, and give him any advice, what would you tell him?
I would tell him, don't be afraid.
Okay.
business, marriage, kids, relationships, partners, making money, losing money. There's just so much fear wrapped up in all of that. And don't be afraid. It's all going to work out. It's going to be fine. You're going to have great success. You're going to have great failure. You're going to have heartbreak. You're going to have joy. It's all just part of this experience. Eat it up. Enjoy every minute of you can, and don't sweat the little stuff. That's probably what I would go back and tell myself.
Awesome. Final question? What's your core purpose in life now at the age of 52, if you had to define it? And if I could push you away from family just a minute and not let you tie that to the kids or the wife, because that's usually a pretty common answer. If you couldn't tie it to family and you described your core purpose right now at the age of 52, what kind of sentence would you put that in?
I like helping clients make money right now. I really like helping guide them to success, and being part of a team. So, creating that team, being a part of it, and seeing clients, it's successful for me, obviously, but to see others grow their business and come out the other side to that, and how that changes their lives and their outlook. I just get a lot of enjoyment and fulfillment out of that.
Love it. Love it. Awesome. I really appreciate it. So for anybody listening, it's gps.global, right? gps.global is the website. Is that the best way for them to reach out, or do you prefer another method?
Absolutely. Reach me there. Would love to talk about any of it. And again, It's always been a pleasure being involved with Riderflex.
Thank you, Charles. I really appreciate your time. Awesome advice and very inspirational for the listeners. So thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And we'll connect soon at the Brown Palace, right? Another bourbon and cigar soon.
Sounds good.
All right, buddy. Take care.
The Riderflex podcast features entrepreneurs, business executives, and the stories behind how they got there, as well as daily tips on career advice and job interviews. Our show can be heard just about anywhere these days, but you can visit riderflex.com and click on the podcast page to hear all the previous episodes and learn more about the recruiting and consulting services we provide. Contact us at the email address info@riderflex.com or 888-964-5876. Thanks so much for listening, and if you enjoy our show, please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like the episodes.